Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. In this video, I'm going to go over details on plant tags. I have tags from some annual plants, some perennials, some shrubs, even some bulbs that are in my yard. And I just wanted to go over the details that the growers had added to these tags and what some of them mean and what you can read into them a little bit more than just what's right there on the tag, especially if you're new to gardening. The first thing you're going to need to know is is it hardy in your area. If you want it to be a perennial, there are annuals, meaning they only live one season, that you will plant probably over the course of a year, where you're just planting them for flowers and then they're going to die in the wintertime. But when we're talking about perennial things like shrubs or trees or herbaceous perennials, things that die to the ground and come back the next spring, you want to know whether they're hardy in your area. And they're going to give you the horticultural zones in which the plant is a perennial. Okay, so on something like this everwhite agapanthus right here, it says, which is a perennial, it says it's hardy in zones 8 to 11. Well, what does that mean? There's a USDA hardiness zone map that's been developed over decades, where the average low temperature during the winter has been determined for all areas of the country. You can pull up this map easily and find yourself on it, and it used to only go by 10-degree increments, meaning 10 additional degrees of cold hardiness as each zone went. So like for me, I'm in zone 7. That's the average low temperature of 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, zone 8 was 10 degrees. That was the average low. Zone 6 was 10 degrees the other way, so minus 10 degrees. And that's how it worked. And it was only zones 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They've since been divided into A and B, and so I'm actually in zone 7B. And so rather than 0, my average low temperature is actually 5. And then 8A would be 10, 8B would be 15, and so on and so forth. And it helped to define a little bit, the subtle differences that can happen within what was just massive land areas. And when I look at a plant tag and I'm looking for the zone hardiness, if it's, let's say I'm in zone, if you're in zone 6, okay, and it turns out you're actually in zone 6A, okay, and the plant you're looking at grows in zone 6 to 9, if you're in zone 6A, I would probably spring plant that plant because you're on the top of where it's marginally cold hardy. You're at the extreme of that plant's cold hardiness area. Those things I would spring plant. So that's one clue that you can get from knowing what zone you're in. Another problem we have is, honestly, gardening has been over the decades because of the mass of people in the United States lived in the north for a long, long time, and only in the last 3 decades with good air conditioning have people really flooded to the south. A lot of gardening was based around cold because it's very cold up there, and we really haven't given as much attention to heat. And I talk about this in some of my talks where if you see a plant that's, this is the opposite of what I said a minute ago. If you see a plant that's hardy in zone 5 to 8 and you're in zone 8, that zone 8 that they're talking about is potentially somewhere like in Washington State or Oregon, where it's slightly more temperate in the summer, where it doesn't get quite as hot. And so you may want to do a little bit of research if you're at the bottom of the hardiness zones, because there may be some heat-related issues growing that plant. As an example of that would be bulbs. Tulips, are hardy in zone 3 to 7, and here in zone 7B, we really need to cold treat them in the southeast because we just don't get quite enough cold in the winter time. But they are in fact hardy in zone 3 to 7 and will come up, but just not as reliably the closer and closer and closer you get to zone 8. Okay, so that's the zone maps, the zone map. The next thing you're going to see is another confusing thing can be sun, part shade, or shade. Shade is obviously less than 4 hours of direct sun, and you really probably only want morning direct sun on it or late evening direct sun on it. That's a plant you're probably not going to want a lot of sun on in the middle of the day, where it's direct. If you need to put sunscreen on, that plant's probably not going to enjoy time in that time of day where you would have to have sunscreen on. Then full sun plants are going to need 6 hours of direct sun or more, and they're going to prefer some of that middle part of that midday sun. If you told me you had 3 hours of sun from 7 a.m. until 10 a.m. and then later in the day, that's not going to be adequate sunlight. When it says full sun, it wants not only 6 hours or more of direct sun, it needs a goodly amount of that 10 to 3 sunlight. You're going to need at least a couple of those hours to be that time. And then part shade. Part shade is going to be a little trickier. You need, if a plant says part sun to shade, the part sun that plant wants is probably leaning a little more toward shade. Okay, if that makes any sense. It can take a lot of direct morning sun and maybe later in the afternoon, probably not a lot of peak sunlight. The rule is on part sun is you want 4 to 6 hours of direct sun. And I'm just telling you, if it says part sun to shade, we're gonna lean that toward being early morning or late afternoon sun. If it says full sun to part shade, that's a different thing. That's a plant that definitely, since it can grow into full sun, it's probably not gonna be that happy with only morning sun or later in the day. I think that's more of that's a plant that can take an hour or two of that midday sun. It's probably gonna need a little bit of it in order to stay full and compact. And so read carefully into what, if it says part shade on a sun tag, lean it more toward the sunlight. If it says part shade on a shade tag, lean it more toward the shade or early morning or late day settings. So the next thing we'll talk about is the height and width. And I'd really like for us to all get this into our minds that when you see the height and width on a shrub or a tree, what that really means is maintainable at. The plants don't really have some sort of switch that goes, yeah, I made it to 3 feet, that's it, just gonna stop here and never grow again. Plants will continue to creep up in height and size. I see plants constantly, that are labeled 3 to 4 feet in height on a label that are 5 or 6 feet now. But they would have been easy to maintain in that 3 to 4 foot height range. So think about it as that, easily maintainable at 3 to 4 feet or 8 to 10 feet or whatever the tag says. The width, and then if you have prostrate plants like ground cover plants, that width is probably going to get wider than what the tag says. The height might actually be accurate. If the height says 1 to 2 feet, but it gets 4 to 6 feet, it's probably gonna get 6 to 8 feet or 8 to 10 feet over a very long period of time. It's not something that's gonna sneak up on you. Nobody's trying to fool you with this information. They're just saying it's super easy to maintain this at this height. Doesn't put on a lot of rapid growth from this point on, is what that means. And let's see, the next thing we would have to cover is perennial versus annual. And I've done a video on annuals versus perennials. Keep in mind that in the springtime, there are gonna be things that you're planting that are perennial for somebody. Let's use Lantana as an example. This is an easy example. Lantana is a perennial. Some Lantanas are perennial where I'm at, but really from zone 8 down to zone 10 or 11, Lantanas are definitely perennial. They can go to sleep in the winter up in zone 8 and almost stay evergreen in zone 11. Those of you who are in, let's say someplace like Michigan in zone 5, that it's a great plant that blooms all summer long, but the winter's definitely gonna kill it. So it's an annual for you. It's a 1-season plant, but it's gonna be a perennial someplace else. So when you're shopping for plants in the springtime, you may run across something that says it's hardy in zone 9 to 11, and you're wondering why it's there. It's there because it's annual color for you. But it is technically a perennial. It's a woody plant where it came from, or where people use it in southern places. You're gonna get plant spacing, is another thing you're gonna get on the back of it. I tend to ignore it on annuals and come in a little bit closer. I don't have, like on these pansies, it said the spacing should be 8 inches. It would take forever for pansies to be 8 inches wide. And so on annuals, I tend to ignore it. And it's only gonna be a single season anyway. If they filled in too tight and got leggy or whatever, I cut them back, or they're coming out anyway. So I don't mind it, but you may wanna be more sensitive to the spacing on your shrubs and trees and actual perennials that you have in your area. And if you're a very patient person, go with the wide number. On this jewel box Distilleum that I planted over here, it says width of 3 to 4 feet. And like I say, probably gonna get slightly wider than that over time. It just is. It's easily maintainable at 3 to 4 feet, like I said. So I might put them about 4 feet, right at 4 feet apart if I have patience. Bulbs are gonna give you information on, the hardiness zones, how high they're gonna get, how much they should be spaced, all those other things, but they're also going to give you a planting depth as well. So on these irises here, up here at the top, it has the depth in which you need to place the bottom of the bulb. And if you have clay-based soils, I would tend to go a little higher than what they say. So this iris was supposed to go 4 inches down in the ground. I only put it about 2.5 or inches in the ground, and then I mulched over the top of that. So it is about 4 inches down, but I included the mulch in that. If you have well-drained soils, you can go to the depth that it says on the bulb package. To quickly sum this up, know what zone you live in, and if you're on the margins of where that plant is hardy, you know, if you're on the southern end, you may want to look around and see if you're seeing that plant. If you're not seeing it, likely the summer is not being kind to them in your area. If you're on the cold side of it, if you're trying to push the boundary a little bit, spring plant them and make sure they have an entire season to be established. Keep in mind the size and shape of the plant is not set in stone. The plants don't have an off switch, and you will have to do some maintenance. There are low maintenance plants, but there are not any no maintenance plants, okay? Some people's perennials are other people's annuals, and that's fine. We want to get all summer color in places that are colder, and so we're probably going to be using some perennial things that bloom all summer that are just not going to come back in our area. We'll be treating them as if they are annuals. And keep in mind, the placement of a plant that's tolerant of part shade should probably be based on whether or not that plant leans toward being a shade plant or leans toward being a sun plant. I think I covered everything that I wanted to cover here in this video, and I hope that helps you read plant tags in the future. Thanks for watching. Okay, we're not gonna eat grass. Go on. No, ma'am.